Before the Russian Revolution, St. Petersburg was not only the political and cultural center of the Russian Empire, but also a city where the pleasure industry flourished. Brothels were an integral part of everyday life, existing in both elite neighborhoods and slums. Prostitution in St. Petersburg evolved over time, starting with strict bans, transitioning to state regulation, and eventually disappearing with the rise of the Bolsheviks. By the mid-19th century, authorities realized that banning prostitution outright was ineffective. In 1843, Emperor Nicholas I signed a decree legalizing brothels. A strict police-controlled system was put in place to minimize the spread of venereal diseases and maintain moral order in the capital. Every woman working in a public house had to register and obtain a document known as the Yellow Ticket. This document stripped her of civil rights, but allowed her to work legally. Prostitutes were required to undergo regular medical examinations, while brothel owners were held responsible for ensuring compliance with regulations. However, legalization did not improve the lives of these women. Their position remained humiliating, and their daily existence was filled with hardship and danger. Though it seemed like an organized system, in reality, it became a mechanism of control over women who were already forced into prostitution due to poverty, lack of family support, or limited education and opportunities. Authorities believed that this system would make the sinful trade less visible on the streets, create a framework for government oversight, and, at the same time, generate income from taxes and licensing fees. The Yellow Ticket and the system of government-controlled prostitution. The term Yellow Ticket came from the color of the document issued to officially registered prostitutes. The choice of color was not accidental. Yellow had long been associated with shame and social marginalization. In various European countries, similar control systems used yellow markers to identify undesirable social elements. For example, in medieval Europe, Jewish people and lepers were forced to wear yellow badges, while in China, yellow armbands were used to mark criminals. Even Emperor Paul I had once ordered that women engaged in prostitution wear yellow clothing, though this decree was abolished after his death. In the Russian Empire, the Yellow Ticket was not merely a permit for legalized prostitution. It was a branding tool that effectively stripped women of their rights. A woman who accepted the Yellow Ticket lost the ability to marry legally, faced restrictions on movement, and was subject to regular medical examinations. At any moment, she could be detained by the police, and many women tore up their yellow tickets in an attempt to escape the system. However, without it, they risked immediate arrest for illegal activity. Who could own a brothel? The regulation of prostitution in St. Petersburg was highly structured. A permit to open a brothel could only be obtained by a woman aged 30 to 60 years old. This rule was meant to ensure that only experienced, mature women managed such establishments, rather than younger individuals who might themselves be exploited. However, the workers within these establishments, known as cocottes, had to be at least 16 years old. Despite this age restriction, many girls were forced into prostitution at an even younger age, using falsified documents or simply being overlooked by authorities. There were also strict rules regarding health and work conditions. For example, during a woman's menstrual cycle, she was forbidden from practicing her trade. This rule was imposed under the pretense of hygiene and health safety, but in reality, it often forced women into extreme poverty when they were unable to work. Medical examinations, a system of control, not protection. The medical control system imposed on registered prostitutes in St. Petersburg was strict, but far from effective. Women who held yellow tickets were required to undergo regular medical checkups conducted by doctors working under police supervision. How were the examinations conducted? These medical inspections took place weekly or bi-weekly in special hospital departments known as venereal cabinets. The examinations aimed to detect signs of syphilis, gonorrhea, trichomoniasis, and other infections. However, the primary diagnostic method was a simple visual inspection. which was notoriously unreliable. If a woman was found to have symptoms of a venereal disease, she was forcibly sent to a specialized hospital and held there until she was declared fully recovered. Some women spent months in these facilities, unable to earn money or leave freely. The corruption and failures of the system. Despite its strict regulations, the system was deeply flawed and corrupt. Many inspections were rushed and superficial, with doctors performing them carelessly or simply for formality's sake. Even worse, some doctors accepted bribes, allowing women with active infections to continue working, which led to widespread disease transmission among brothel clients. The conditions inside venereal hospitals were often horrific. Women were subjected to long periods of isolation, and medical treatments could be humiliating and painful. Many doctors and hospital staff treated the patients with little to no respect, viewing them as unworthy of humane treatment. Because of this, many women chose to avoid official checkups altogether, preferring to work illegally rather than risk being locked away for months. Society's view of yellow ticket women. Despite the official legalization of prostitution, women who held yellow tickets were treated with deep contempt by society. Even if a woman left a brothel, her past haunted her for life. A former prostitute could not legally marry a respectable man, nor could she find decent work or restore her reputation. Respectable households and businesses refused to hire women with a history in prostitution, effectively leaving them trapped in a cycle of survival sex work. The stigma extended to their children. If a yellow ticket holder gave birth, her child was automatically branded an outcast. Many such children ended up abandoned, growing up in orphanages or on the streets, facing a lifetime of discrimination. The end of the yellow ticket system. The yellow ticket system lasted until 1917, when the Bolsheviks abolished it, along with the Russian monarchy. The new Soviet government declared prostitution a symptom of bourgeois decay and closed all brothels. However, this did not mean prostitution disappeared, it simply went underground. Soviet policies erased legal recognition of sex work, but many women still engaged in it out of necessity, now without any form of legal protection. The three tiers of St. Petersburg's brothels. In pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg, brothels varied greatly in status, clientele, and conditions. The most prestigious houses of pleasure were located in the heart of the city, on Italian Street, Potemkin Street, and around Mikhailovsky Square. These high-class brothels catered to aristocrats, diplomats, wealthy industrialists, and elite military officers. Women who worked there were carefully selected for their beauty, manners, and education. Many were trained in music, conversation, and the art of entertaining. Unlike the lower-tier brothels, these women were not just sex workers. They were companions, offering their clients intellectual stimulation as well as physical pleasure. Luxury surrounded every aspect of these places. The interiors were elegantly decorated with fine furniture and artwork. Clients enjoyed expensive French wines, gourmet dinners, and live music performances. These brothels were not just places of pleasure, but also served as exclusive social clubs, where men of high status could network and engage in refined entertainment. Slightly lower in status were the middle-class brothels, located on the outskirts of the city. Their clientele included minor government officials, lower-ranking officers, and merchants. These establishments were livelier and more chaotic than their elite counterparts. Instead of refined salons, these brothels were known for wild parties, dancing, and even small theatrical performances. However, the conditions for the women working there were harsher. They were more vulnerable to exploitation and violence, had minimal earnings, and lived under strict control from brothel owners. At the bottom of the social hierarchy of prostitution were the cheap brothels and illegal dens, mostly found in the city's slums, particularly in Senaya Square, Ligovka, and Vasilyevsky Island. These places were infested with crime, disease, and extreme poverty. Sanitary conditions were non-existent, and the women working there lived in horrific conditions, constantly at risk of violence, disease, and even murder. The clientele consisted of soldiers, sailors, factory workers, and the city's poorest men. Many women ended up in these brothels against their will. Some were sold into prostitution, others lured with false promises of a better life, and many had no other means of survival. One of the most infamous dens in St. Petersburg was Malinik, a notorious brothel near Sanaya Square. It had such a terrible reputation that even the police hesitated to interfere. Inside, there was constant drinking, violence, and lawlessness, and many women disappeared without a trace after entering its doors. The tragic reality of women in St. Petersburg's brothels. The lives of women in St. Petersburg's brothels were often marked by suffering, exploitation, and despair. While some entered the profession seeking financial independence or seduced by the illusion of luxury, most arrived out of sheer desperation. Many came from impoverished rural families, where starvation and hardship left them with few options for survival. Others were orphaned or abandoned, dismissed from factories with no means of support, or tricked into prostitution by false promises of stable work as maids or seamstresses. Once inside the system, escape was nearly impossible. Official brothels operated as taxed businesses, meaning that a large portion of a woman's earnings went to the state and the brothel owner. On average, a worker received only 1/4 of what a client paid, leaving her trapped in debt and unable to save enough to leave. Those who tried to escape often found themselves arrested for vagrancy or forced to return to work under even harsher conditions. While a few women managed to rise above their circumstances, sometimes through the protection of wealthy patrons, they were the exception. The vast majority suffered from illness, abuse, and exploitation. Venereal diseases were rampant, and many prostitutes died young from syphilis, tuberculosis, or complications from untreated infections. Women who worked in illegal prostitution faced even greater dangers. They were subject to police raids, extortion from corrupt officials, and violence from both clients and criminal gangs. Without any form of legal protection, they were entirely at the mercy of those who exploited them. By the late 19th century, as St. Petersburg grew into a massive industrial center, the number of unregistered prostitutes increased dramatically. Authorities attempted to tighten regulations, cracking down on women working without yellow tickets, imprisoning them, or sending them to forced hospital treatment. However, the system was full of loopholes, and many simply moved to other cities where the authorities were less strict. The end of the system. After the Revolution of 1917, the Bolsheviks declared prostitution a symbol of bourgeois decay and shut down all brothels. The new government issued decrees promoting gender equality, and the yellow ticket system was abolished along with the monarchy. However, prostitution did not disappear. It simply went underground. Without state oversight, sex work became even more dangerous, as women lost what little protection they once had. Throughout the Soviet era, prostitution remained illegal, yet widespread, operating in hidden and unofficial forms. Though the world of pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg's brothels is long gone, the struggles of these women remain a dark and rarely discussed chapter in Russian history, one that reveals the harsh realities of social inequality, gender oppression, and the consequences of a system that treated women as commodities rather than human beings.